Hiya! Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to tell the story of North Manhattan's Dyckman Farmhouse using a selection of drawings, paintings, and prints. The fantastic staff at the museum allowed us to cherry-pick their collection and use the highest quality scans available. Unbelievable. And thank you. Let's get started. Here we're looking at a field sketch of the Dyckman Farmhouse made in 1818 by John Randell Jr. He was surveying the island for a future street grid. In the sketch we can make out the shape of the farmhouse's gambrel roof, the two porches, the summer kitchen, and several outbuildings. A follow-up, measured layout of the farm was integrated into his finished 1819 watercolor map of the property, and when the farmhouse was restored in 1916, it was inspired by this configuration of the home. Sometime around 1835, Dyckman foreman Arnulf or Arnold Bandel took a pencil and a piece of coarse paper across Kingsbridge Road and sat down to sketch what he saw. It's the first full view of the farmhouse drawn from life that we know. Immediately, we can see that the farmhouse has had an addition built onto its north side. We can also see what a tidy place it was. New-looking picket fences and gates, tended wisteria trellis over the front stairs, and another newly built trellis in the garden. Everything seems swept and neat, which could be artistic license or simply a well-run working farm. It's 1850 now, and the house has the same clean look. A tree has grown in front of the north annex, and vines have climbed the garden trellis. And if you look closely, you can see signs of life. A young girl chasing two dogs with a broom in the garden next to the summer kitchen. Soon after, the farm became a convenient stopping place for herds of cattle to rest on their way to slaughterhouses downtown. This made the farmhouse a much noisier and smellier place. And since brothers Isaac and Michael Dyckman were getting up there in years, the household moved a few blocks uptown to a quieter place near today's Marble Hill Metro-North station. They continued to operate the farm and rent out the farmhouse. This rare map view from the 1860s shows something else we haven't seen, a large garden, maybe even a formal garden, on the south side of the home. To the north we see an impressive number of outbuildings, probably stables, barns, shops, and sheds. Here's an expansive view taken from the 1866 Valentine's Manual. Looking south down Kingsbridge Road and out Broadway, we can see Inwood's first public school, number 52, built on land donated to the city by the Dyckmans and completed in 1858. In the distance are the heights of Fort George. Along Broadway we can see an early street light, gas of course, and a line of tall telegraph poles marching toward the business district downtown. In the foreground, a teamster leads a pair of oxen back to the barn. The farmhouse itself looks well used, but well maintained. It has a fresh coat of white paint, and the walkways are clean. The trellis over the front steps, though, is nowhere to be seen. For that matter, neither are the front steps. It seems like the main entry these days is from the side. And looking at the back porch, we can see that it's different from the front porch. It's not continuous with the line of the gambrel roof like the front porch is. We'll get another look in a later image. In January of 1875, artist Francis Schell and two of his artist friends came uptown and then stopped outside the farmhouse while Francis created this pencil sketch on a cold wintry day. You can almost feel the wind. The lay of the land is immediately felt, and Schell's ability to draw perspective accurately lets us see how the house fronted right onto Broadway at the same level as the roadway. But we also see the first signs of wear and tear. In the foreground lies a ruin of an old fieldstone fence, and the wooden picket fences surrounding the farmhouse, so perfectly maintained in earlier views, look like they've seen better days. 5 years before the sketch was drawn, the Dyckmans sold the farmhouse at auction to an investor, Benjamin Fairchild, and for the next 40-odd years, it would be operated as a boarding house and rental property. Over the decades, the accumulation of deferred maintenance and neglect would take its toll, and the property started to show it, looking more run down with each passing year. Around this time, Frederick Leo Hunter, an accomplished painter and engraver, was inspired by this shabby chic patina that was starting to exude from the home. And for several years, from 1876 to 1879, he created at least 4 views in various media and from just about every angle. If the picket fence was still there, he's ignored it, and we don't see Broadway either. But we do see that the wood portion of the exterior has lost its paint, and the house has taken on a mellow brown color. We can also see the back porch clearly for the first time. Compared to the front, it's more of a covered backyard deck. George Plowman's view, probably from the 1880s, shows the home continuing its decline. Clapboards are in disrepair, stonework is in need of repointing, haphazardly replaced window panes and a damaged chimney all contribute to the feeling that the house, at least structurally, is just being used up. There are still signs of life, however. There's laundry hanging out to dry, and you could see a child by the door to the summer kitchen. The old farmhouse is still hanging in there, but how much more can it take? In 1913, there was a sudden flurry of interest in Dyckman. Just the year before, Isham Park had been created a few blocks to the north. Former Parks Commissioner Charles Stover called for the farmhouse's preservation. Its current owners at the time, Mr. and Mrs. Judge, offered the house up free of charge if someone would only come and move it. But it never happened. The idea had just been premature. But this interest excited the curiosity of 2 members of the Ashcan School, James Preston and Ernest Lawson. In the winter of 1913, both artists, independently, planted their easels on the corner of 204th Street and produced completely different interpretations. Here in Preston's watercolor, we see the careworn home being swallowed up by overgrowth and rubble. For the first time, we notice that Broadway has been lowered 10 or 15 feet to help streetcars avoid having to navigate steep slopes as they wound their way up to the end of the line at 220th Street. Now the farmhouse towers above its surroundings, and in doing so, it seems less a part of them. The woman in the foreground with a bonnet, apron, and peasant clothing seems to hearken back to Inwood's agricultural past, while the brightly painted red fire hydrant, clearly a sign of the encroaching metropolis, points toward the future. Lawson turns the farmhouse into something completely different. Bathed in blue light and half hidden by falling snow, it's a veiled enigma. In the foreground, a pair of white horses stop at the corner of 204th Street while a man approaches them in the snow, passing a brightly glowing gaslight. The house itself sits proudly back, high on the hill, with a warm light emanating from the summer kitchen windows. Seen from the cold corner, it's an inviting shelter from the storm. A 1915 to 1920 etching by Bernard Wall is a throwback. He brings Broadway back up to its pre-1890s level and restores the feeling of tidiness and good care that one could see in early 19th century works. It is indeed an example of artistic license. This is the farmhouse he wants us to see, that he wants to see. It's a beautifully done image, begun when the farmhouse was still at risk of destruction and completed after it had been rescued and restored. In 1915, the 2 surviving Dyckman sisters, Fanny Frederica and Mary Alice, managed to reacquire their old family homestead from Mr. and Mrs. Judge. In August of that year, they began to negotiate with the city for its restoration and preservation as a park. And they did reach a deal. Yay! And the sisters put their spouses to work. Fanny's husband, architect Alexander Macmillan Welch, oversaw the structural renovation, while Mary's husband, well-known curator Bashford Dean, supervised the creation of the museum. And here's a nice pair of watercolors before and after, painted by E. Eldon Dean. Luckily, it turned out that the bones of the house were still good, and in July 1916, less than a year after the deal had been struck, the Dyckman Museum opened to the public. Surrounded by an acre or so of park-like splendor, it even had a small formal garden, inspired from the one back in the 1860s. After the grand reopening, magazines, newspapers, and architectural publications sent their photographers and artists to cover the new museum. But the qualities that had inspired artists to use the farmhouse were gone. Gone was the patina of time. Gone was the tumble-down wreck teetering on the edge of oblivion. New and shiny just didn't inspire. In the 1930s, illustrator Vernon Howe Bailey touched onto something new by highlighting the creative tension of an ancient farmhouse existing in an otherwise urban setting. Would some of the old mystery begin to come back to inspire artists? So we fast forward to the 1970s, 50 quiet years. And here, with the growth of pop art and graffiti, we see the farmhouse in a great advertisement published in the Heights Inwood weekly newspaper. It's vital, it's hip, energized. This 1993 watercolor by Edwin Olson takes a lesson from Bernard Wall's Etching, a house beautiful removed from its urban context. This would frequently be the form that inspired artists in the 20th century. Richard Mccullough's beautiful 2001 watercolor pictures the farmhouse as it may have looked in the early 1800s. It was published in a book about historic sites in the city. In this colorful poster-like flyer for a 2009 event, former farmhouse director Susan DeVries used computer technology to transform a photo into something with a modern graphic appeal. The energy is positive. The spring blossoms a sign of hope, of reawakening. Around this time, though perhaps earlier, the farmhouse began programming events specifically for artists, where as a group they could set up materials and create new works on site. These events, along with the annual Uptown Art Stroll, continue to draw artists to the corner of 204th Street and Broadway. In 2017, as seen here, the Urban Sketchers NYC group brought over 30 artists for a fantastic afternoon of creativity. Today, works created by contemporary artists such as Nick Golubiewski, Alison Loeb, Thor Wickstrom, and Rich Herrera, and many, many others, show us that the new lease on life the farmhouse received in 1916 continues to inspire those who create. Its preservation has become a bridge from our collective past, leading to an exciting and dynamic future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. And special thanks to all the artists, past, present, and future.